When the nation watched that hearing, they expected another routine exchange, a few rehearsed answers, some political theater, maybe a headline or two. What no one expected was for the Attorney General herself to completely unravel on live television. What began as a calm oversight session turned into one of the most uncomfortable public implosions ever seen inside a congressional chamber. She wasn't just caught off guard, she was cornered. Every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to twist the question only made things worse. And by the end, what she said and refused to say sent shockwaves through the entire room. Because the questions that day weren't about politics. They were about power, how it's used, how it's abused, and what happens when the people meant to uphold the law begin treating it like a personal weapon. It started calmly enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Meng for holding this important hearing, and thank you, Attorney General Bondi, for appearing before us today. Madam Attorney General, I serve, in addition to the Appropriations Committee, as a ranking member of the Committee on House Administration. I sent you a letter last week along with my Republican counterpart, Chairman Brian Stile, requesting an increase in federal prosecutory resources to address threats against members of Congress, particularly in light of what happened last week in Minnesota, that tragedy. In 2024, the U.S. Capitol Police identified and received nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats against members. Federal prosecutors have only secured 8 convictions so far, and the heightened threat environment demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Will you commit to assigning an assistant U.S. attorney or a special assistant U.S. attorney in each of the 94 federal districts to, at least on a part-time basis, investigate and prosecute threats against members of Congress?
So thank you for bringing that up, and I take that very seriously. Not only what happened in Minnesota was horrible. I've spoken to Keith Ellison. I've spoken to Amy Klobuchar about that. It's horrible. We are involved in that. The FBI was involved. Our U.S. attorneys are involved. Many of these are district to district. So the way we're doing that is, I will tell you, my National Security Division is involved in all of those and assisting in those. We meet every single morning and we discuss that. But many of those, Minnesota, will be handled in the state in which it happened. Another one is
So, may
Governor. I'm sorry if I can keep going. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't mean
Quickly,
to.
though.
I filibuster. Governor Shapiro and what happened in Pennsylvania with Governor Shapiro. I've spoken to Governor Shapiro. We are working hand in hand, our U.S. attorney with the district attorney there, hand in hand, just like in Minnesota. I made sure our U.S. attorney and our district attorneys there were working hand in hand. Political party doesn't matter when something like this happens. And I also want to make sure all members of Congress are safe as well.
Okay, and I would reiterate, Chairman Stile and I think Chairman Stile and I agree that at least a part-time in each of the 94 districts would be appropriate. Let me change topics for just a moment. I'm
Really
sorry.
quick on that. Yes, we're doing that through our National Security Division, so I think that's already in the works, and I would be glad to meet with you in a secure facility to talk about that.
Very good, thank you. Continuing, in addition to my role here, the committee that I serve on as an authorizer oversees Capitol security as well as federal elections, so I'm closely following the aftermath of January 6th. Recently, several defendants who received presidential pardons related to that day are now arguing in court that the pardon covers crimes like, for instance, illegal firearm possession discovered in a search of an individual's home in California months after January 6th. What's your position on whether the pardons cover these separate offenses?
The pardon power rests with the president, not the Department of Justice, and some of that is pending litigation, and I cannot discuss pending litigation.
Well, I'm not asking you about who has the right to a pardon. I think as the Department of Justice in February wrote, the pardon is an act of grace which removes the punishment from a crime a person has committed. It further said, in its effect, the granting of a pardon is in no sense the overturning of a judgment of conviction. It is an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment. So as the chief law enforcement officer, what's your opinion, not the president's power of whether he can offer a pardon? That's pretty clear in the Constitution. But for crimes committed unrelated to January 6th, would you suggest that the pardons would cover activities or crimes potentially committed outside of that by the same person?
Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the
No, I actually
commutation
referred
of
to
all
January
the,
6th. I'm sorry.
all the sentences that,
Well,
the people that were on death row. I've met with those families,
No,
and
I-
all of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
So, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, but you swore an oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are on the extent to which pardons cover potential crimes committed by individuals who've been pardoned but unrelated to January 6th.
Do you mean the ones that were done by the auto pen? I'm not going to discuss
right.
anything that
Mr.
could be
Chairman,
or not be
I
pending litigation.
respectfully, you know, Ms. DeLauro accused you of filibustering. I think that's the height of filibustering. This is a serious, serious topic. And for you to suggest that you don't have an opinion or to divert to other things that have nothing to do with January 6 pardons, I think is frankly demeaning to your responsibilities and your job. With that, I'll yield back.
The Attorney General, known for her sharp tone and loyalty to the man who appointed her, took her seat as lawmakers shuffled their papers and the cameras began to roll. But the first question came like a lightning strike. It wasn't about budget numbers or staffing issues. It was about something far more dangerous, the limits of executive mercy. How far can a presidential pardon actually go? When one member asked if a pardon could protect someone from new crimes committed after the fact, her face changed instantly. A flicker of panic, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not going to discuss that," she said, but that answer didn't satisfy anyone in the room. Because the question wasn't theoretical, it was tied to real cases, people who had already been pardoned and then months later were found breaking laws again. They were arguing that their pardon covered everything, past, present, and future, that once forgiven they could never be punished again. That's not how the Constitution works. And everyone in that room knew it. Yet instead of giving a clear legal interpretation, the Attorney General deflected. She shifted topics. She mentioned unrelated cases. She tried to bring up other names, other scandals, anything to dodge the direct question. It was painful to watch, and then came the follow-up. "I'm not asking you about anyone else," the congressman said firmly. "I'm asking you as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, what's your view?" Silence. She blinked, reorganized her papers, then almost unbelievably asked, "Do you mean the ones that were done by the autopun?" The room froze. It wasn't just evasion anymore. It was chaos. Lawmakers stared in disbelief as she rambled about unrelated matters, her tone rising with every word. What should have been a moment of clarity turned into a spiral of confusion. And that's when it became clear she wasn't avoiding the question because she didn't know the law. She was avoiding it because she knew the answer would destroy her. But the meltdown didn't stop there. Earlier in the same hearing, she'd already been grilled for something that should have been simple, her own ethics. One congresswoman asked a direct question: "Were you ever registered as an agent of a foreign principal?" It's a question with a yes or no answer. Instead, the Attorney General launched into a defensive monologue about her brief work with a foreign government during the World Cup, claiming it was about anti-trafficking. She bristled when pressed, accused her questioner of being discourteous, and tried to flip the attack back. But what she didn't realize was that this wasn't just a casual exchange, it was an official record. And every word of that deflection became evidence of something far more troubling, a pattern of secrecy, entitlement, and contempt for oversight. Then came the part no one saw coming, the financial bombshell. A representative calmly read from a document showing that on the very same day the administration announced a controversial new trade policy that tanked the market, the Attorney General had quietly sold over $1 million in media-related stock. Days later, that stock plunged by more than 13%. She'd dodged a massive personal loss by mere hours. When confronted, she didn't deny it. She smiled bitterly and said she'd take a class in financial literacy if anyone thought she'd profited. Then she tried to pivot, again, back to her anti-trafficking work. It was breathtaking, not because it was shocking, but because of how casually she dismissed the accusation. It wasn't outrage, it wasn't remorse, it was indifference. That single exchange revealed something deeper than corruption. It showed a culture inside the administration where ethics had become optional, where power wasn't about serving the public but protecting the few who wielded it. And the person who finally tore through the fog was Congressman Jamie Raskin. When Raskin spoke, the noise stopped. His tone wasn't angry, it was surgical. He didn't waste a word. He reminded the room, and the country, that the issue before them wasn't about personalities or partisan loyalty. It was about whether the law still means anything when the people enforcing it are the ones breaking it. He called it what it was, a constitutional confrontation, and he was right. He laid out, piece by piece, how the founders had designed this government to resist the very kind of corruption they were witnessing in that room. Power divided across branches, restrained by law, accountable to the people. And now one branch was testing whether it could rewrite that balance through loyalty and fear. His words hit like thunder. He reminded everyone that America has impeached only 15 federal judges in its entire history, and every single one for corruption or serious crimes, not for political disagreements. The founders never meant for the presidency or the Department of Justice to be above that standard. Then Raskin said something that made the chamber go silent. "We are in a dramatic constitutional confrontation today," he said. "Every facet of the framers' design has been activated to try and save constitutional democracy and freedom." He wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't an abstract lecture on civics, it was a warning. From the moment this administration took office, it has tested every line of authority, from Congress to the courts, from state governments to its own internal watchdogs. It's pushed boundaries, ignored subpoenas, defied rulings, and demanded loyalty where only the law should matter. That's why hearings like this matter. They're not just about one person's ethics, they're about the survival of the system itself. Raskin went on to describe how the framers of the Constitution, aware of human frailty, built a structure where power would never be absolute. He invoked Lord Acton's timeless phrase, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely," reminding everyone that this isn't just a theory, it's history repeating itself. He described how power was meant to be split, vertically between federal and state governments, and horizontally among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. No one man, no one office was ever meant to control all of it. Yet here we are, he said, watching an executive branch that behaves like it owes nothing to anyone. And then he brought it full circle. He described how across the country, state attorneys general were now banding together to fight back. Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, Illinois, each one filing lawsuits to block unconstitutional orders and defend basic rights, and they were winning. Nearly 200 injunctions had already been granted by federal courts, even those appointed by the very people trying to dismantle those rights. In that moment, Raskin transformed what looked like chaos into a story of resistance, proof that the system was bruised, but not broken. Meanwhile, the Attorney General sat silently, eyes down, as the congressman's words echoed through the room. He wasn't just talking to her, he was talking to every official who had ever decided that loyalty mattered more than integrity. Every insider who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Every citizen who had begun to wonder if accountability was still possible. By the time Raskin finished, the hearing had become something else entirely. It wasn't a fight, it was a reckoning. And yet what makes the moment so powerful isn't the humiliation of one public official, it's what it exposed about an entire era of governance. Think about it. When the top law enforcement officer in the country can't or won't answer basic constitutional questions, that's not just a personal failure, it's a national alarm. When ethical breaches are dismissed with sarcasm, when accountability is treated like an inconvenience, when oversight becomes a performance rather than a duty, democracy itself begins to rot from the inside out. That's why people like Raskin, Dean, and others keep showing up. Not because it's glamorous, not because it wins them political points, but because someone has to remind the country that the law isn't a suggestion, it's the spine that holds everything together, and it's fragile. Every time an official abuses power, every time an institution looks the other way, that spine weakens just a little more, until one day, the system collapses under its own hypocrisy. But here's the part the public often misses: this battle isn't happening in headlines or cable news chyrons. It's happening in quiet rooms, in late-night filings, in hearings like this one. It's the slow grinding work of defending a republic against the people who think they own it. That's what made the meltdown so unforgettable. It wasn't just a political embarrassment. It was a moment when the mask slipped, when arrogance met accountability, and accountability finally spoke back. Because behind every shrug, every no comment, every evasive half-answer, there was a truth she couldn't hide. The system she helped build is cracking, and she knows it. The irony is that her own words gave it away. She called others incompetent, accused her questioners of being unprofessional, even tried to claim moral high ground. But underneath it all was fear, fear of exposure, fear of losing the illusion of control, fear of facing the very justice she once commanded. And in the end, that's what this story is really about, not just corruption, but consequence. The hearing might have ended, the cameras might have stopped rolling, but the record remains. Every unanswered question, every contradiction, every deflection is now part of history. And when historians look back, they won't just see one official's downfall, they'll see a warning about what happens when a government forgets who it serves. So if you're watching this and thinking it's all noise, remember, democracy doesn't collapse overnight, it decays one unanswered question at a time. And for once the world saw it happen live, but maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe it takes a public reckoning to remind everyone that no office, no oath, and no title places anyone above the truth. The Attorney General walked into that room, thinking she could outtalk the system. She walked out having proven why the system must outlast people like her. Because at the end of the day, power doesn't corrupt in silence. It corrupts in plain sight, when those in charge forget that they serve, not rule. And as long as there are voices willing to ask the hard questions, to refuse the scripted answers, and to demand the truth, there's still hope. Hope that hearings like this won't just expose corruption, they'll end it. Hope that accountability still has a heartbeat, and hope that somewhere someone's still paying attention. If you're one of those people, if you believe in shining light where others want darkness, in holding the powerful to their word, then this is your reminder to stay engaged. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in transparency and accountability.